on behalf of the team, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this symposium. First, I'll introduce the symposium team and presenters. Anne Söderlund from Mälardalen University in Västerås, Sweden. Myself, Elizabeth Dean from the University of British Columbia, Vancouver, Canada. Marilyn Moffat from New York University, New York, the United States. And Margot Skinner from the University of Otago, Dunedin in New Zealand. Being unable to be in Cape Town today, Professor Söderlund will present by audio transmission. This symposium, as many of you know, builds on 3 physical therapy summits on global health convened at the 3 previous WCPT congresses. The first one was in Vancouver, the second in Amsterdam, and the third in Singapore. Their proceedings have been successfully published in Physiotherapy Theory and Practice in 2011, 2015, and hopefully the third in the not too distant future. That is now currently under review. We are truly grateful to so many of you, too many to mention, with whom we have had contact over the years and who have helped to inform this work. It is truly you who have had the interest, the energy that has really driven this locomotive, and to the point where it is now when we're really ready to establish some health-focused competencies. And not only that, but to have accreditable education standards, which requires both input from our organizations as well as buy-in from our physical therapy education programs. In previous summits, participants served as ambassadors for disseminating the information worldwide. It has been this commitment that I believe has made the message of the summits so widely disseminated, and so that has been you. This is an interactive symposium. It has been constructed to elicit your valuable input through enabling you to practice clinical health competencies that can be readily integrated into practice. We further hope that on your return home that you will conduct a seminar with what you have learned here today and what you will have practiced. We are not only committed to physical therapists adopting health competencies into their daily practices, but also that as the leading established, largely non-pharmacologic health profession in the world, that we as physical therapists lead the way and provide that much-needed leadership to other health professions, most notably nursing and medicine. That is truly our role this century. You should have 3 handouts. You'll have a copy of the health improvement card, and this is actually available also on an app, so when we break out into our little sessions, you may wish to use the app version and maybe take this one home to have a look at and to review. Another handout is some strategies for health behavior change that you will refer to in the breakout session. And lastly, what Marilyn Moffat will lead you through in terms of organizational change in our profession. And we really all need to consider, it's not just what we practice, but how this will be truly integrated into practice will only come through organizational change and commitment by our schools to integrate this into the curriculum. So with respect to the learning objectives, at the end of the symposium, participants, you, will be able to describe an evidence-informed lifestyle behavior change toolkit for physical therapists. However, I have to say, given the limitation of time, we've decided to focus those competencies on the ones that are consistent with the health improvement card, which I will describe to you shortly. And that health improvement card has been developed by the World Health Professions Association, which is supported by 5 health professions. Most notably, physical therapy had a very active role, and during Marilyn Moffat's presidency, she was very active in promoting the use of this tool, which is actually needed. Now we need to demonstrate some leadership in its use. The second, and I shall present related to the health improvement card itself, and the audio transmission from Anne Sutherland. She will talk about the behavioral strategies that can be used to help effect health behavior change that comes from that assessment on the health improvement card. Second, to understand the discrete multi-level organizational steps from WCPT to its member organizations needed to integrate health promotion into standard physical therapy practice. And third, to describe the standards and examine the mechanisms for integrating health promotion practice into physical therapy entry-level education, and that will be presented by Margot Skinner. The floor then will be open for your valuable input and discussion about the interactive components in this symposium. So first we will have you discuss, after you've had a chance to practice very briefly, the use of the health improvement cards and some of the behavioral strategies. We'd like to hear from you about the experience that you had and to envisage what that might look like in your context and how can we make that work better in your context. Then we will have a second part to the interactive discussion, and that will be regarding organizational change. You will hear Marilyn describe what has been done, but how do you see from your perspectives in your context how we can make a better change to ensure that such tools as the health improvement card get integrated into our standard practice for every patient. And then lastly would be your views, because even if you're not an educator, you've been students, and what would further encourage you to use tools such as the health improvement card and behavioral change strategies in practice. So that's what we're going to do this morning. So the health improvement card. How many have actually seen the health improvement card before? A little show of hands. And how many of you have actually used it? So you are not alone, and this is why I think this session has been so important and necessary. We have this valuable tool that has been underutilized. So let me show you the resources that are available. There's a wonderful user guide for health professionals. And in that guide, and I'll review a little bit about the support for this health improvement card. What are the non-communicable diseases? What is this card exactly? As you can see, it's basically 2 pages. What are the most important modifiable lifestyle behavioral factors? What are the most important metabolic physiologic risk factors? And how can this health improvement card help people achieve their health goals? Okay, so first of all, let's look at what these lifestyle-related non-communicable diseases are. You're well familiar with these: heart disease, cancer, hypertension, and stroke, type 2 diabetes, chronic obstructive lung disease. But when we look epidemiologically, if you look across the top, these are some leading Western countries, the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom. And all of these are the leading causes of premature death, as you well know, are these lifestyle-related conditions. But as we see emerging countries, the most populated countries in the world, China and India, we have incomplete data for these countries, but the trends are very clear that these are not only, in many instances, the leading causes of death, but we're seeing tremendous escalation in their prevalence over years. So there's a lot of work that we need to be doing, and we're finding that in middle and low-income countries that this emergence of the lifestyle-related non-communicable diseases is escalating at an unprecedented rate. And I'm delighted to be working with Chinese colleagues and Indian colleagues to help curb the tide, and there's some very important work going on in those countries. So here is your card. And it comes in 2 pages typically. There are 3 sections, and at the top we have basic information about the patient, age and gender and waist circumference, body mass index. Below that we have the biometric section, the 4 leading factors that have been identified that are high risk factors from a metabolic point of view: body mass index, fasting blood sugar, cholesterol, and blood pressure. And on the right side, the leading health behaviors or lifestyle behaviors that contribute to these non-communicable diseases: the quality of the diet, physical activity, tobacco use, and use of alcohol. So we're going to touch on these a little bit more. So let's look at the most important lifestyle behavior risk factors that can be modified. And these have the effect sizes of these, and if we can improve diet, improve the level of physical activity, reduce tobacco use, and reduce harmful alcohol consumption, the effect of that, either individually or collectively, surpasses any medication. It absolutely surpasses any medication in terms of its effect size on health. So we need to take health extremely seriously. Also, the beauty of this card is that it's color-coded. You'll see a traffic light system there. The green meaning the person is at goal or it has superior health habits, cautionary level, and a high risk level. So each of these, if you see for healthy diet, physical activity, tobacco use, use of alcohol on that vertical axis, the positive suggests if you eat better, it gives you the criterion for achieving better health outcomes, as well as the negative shows you or indicates to the patient and creates an opportunity for discussion with the patient what the consequences would be or are if you do not adhere to those basic criteria. So this is a very interesting and very nice entry point for conversation about those things that we find so difficult to discuss with patients. And what are the most important metabolic biometric risk factors that should be monitored? Well, as I mentioned, and as we well know, body mass index, fasting blood sugar, and cholesterol and blood pressure. Very simple and yet very powerful indices of risk to health. And similarly, we've got the gold criteria, we've got the cautionary, the yellow criteria, and we've got the high risk criteria. So healthy diet, just as an example. An unhealthy diet increases your risk of being overweight, obese, developing oral diseases, as well as hypertension. That could certainly be expanded. And then on the positive side, by eating more fruit and vegetables every day and seeking advice on lowering salt and saturated fats will augment health. And these are very minimal guidelines, 5 portions of fruit and vegetables per day. We certainly know it could well exceed that and should exceed that. But as a general goal, that's something to strive for. And so we have a parallel for physical activity, the positive benefits of physical activity, very simply for a patient to understand, and the negative consequence shown by the negative sign there if you do not adhere or achieve goal. In this case, a minimum of at least 30 minutes per day, and we know that 150 minutes of moderately vigorous activity per week, which is actually being challenged, and it's almost double that by some authorities' estimation. And then similarly for tobacco use, of course, there's no amber or yellow or cautionary here. Any amount of smoking is adverse to health. And lastly, the use of the harmful use of alcohol. So that is the health improvement card, and on each side of this card, you'll see at the bottom some very important places to enter more information. You'll see a number 1 there, and that is the patient's commitment to, the patient's commitment and readiness to change. That's followed by what activities the patient, him or herself, believes that they could instigate or effect in the interest of their health. And thirdly, and importantly, you as the therapist, what is your action? How will you follow this person? What is your commitment to this individual to ensure that they are able to achieve their health goals? So we have that entry for the patient and for the therapist on both sides of the health improvement card. Okay. So what I would like you to do now, we only have several minutes, but very briefly pair up with somebody beside you. You can go into twos or threes perhaps, kind of assign a physical therapist and a patient. And I want you can make it up if you wish, but just get used to asking these questions. So everybody has a card, health improvement card. If you could just get used to going through and recording the data. As I say, you can make it up, and then discuss with the individual. So I want you to fill in the best as you can each of these sections. And then for the physical therapist to discuss with the patient regarding the interest and readiness to change, the commitment piece, and discuss lifestyle priorities, and for the therapist to inform the patient about what his or her commitment is to following up with you, or what resources would be provided, and so on. Is that clear? Can we take a few minutes to do that? And what we will do is, I'm going to have you work on that. We'll finish the remaining parts of the Focus Symposium, and then we'll go through and discuss your views about this experience in the last half hour. Okay? So if you'd like to just pair up and just go through the card and just ask those questions. Okay, off you go. I'll give you 5 minutes and then a minute warning when we're about to terminate. And 1 more minute. Excellent. So in the interest of time, I am going to bring you back. I love the buzz. I can hear the excitement, the interest, and there's a lot of information being exchanged. Excellent. Just a few slides to wind up, because, you know, we know that good health is good for you, right? But we also need to be reminded that this is very consistent with contemporary definitions of physical therapy being health-focused, not just injury, illness, and disease-focused. When we look at the international classification of function, disability, and health, this has been endorsed by the WCPT for many years, and it's all about health conditions and health status and so on. So it's very consistent with where we are professionally. Also, when we look at the pillars of what needs to underpin our practice, if we look at the inputs here on the bottom, determinants of health and lifestyle, and disease, injury, and illness is sort of that one component. These others feed into that. And when we look upwards vertically, we see that health promotion and prevention, and then that we see the rehabilitation or strictly traditional physical therapy side, and all that leading to not only individual health, because if we improve individual health and well-being, we're improving societal health and well-being. So also, you need to know how powerful you are, because when we look at the World Health Organization's voluntary global targets, if we adhere to the health improvement card, which isn't actually perfect, but it's a very good start, we can address 7 of the 9 global health targets. How powerful is that? You are enormously powerful. Even with the use of this one simple tool that we are having you experiment with today. So yes, we are powerful. We have a center of excellence for a toolkit that goes beyond the health improvement card at this website. If you go onto Melodalen University, or you can, I think, track it quite easily using some keywords. And we are adding validated and reliable tools as well as translated tools to this toolkit. We've had a few hiccups this past year for a number of reasons, but we are still working on this, and we'll publish increasingly to help and facilitate health assessment and health-focused assessment and intervention. So I shall pass this over. Now we are going to move to Anne Sutherland, who will come in by audio transmission. Can we put her voice up?
Unfortunately, I cannot
louder.
be with you in real life, but due to some health issues, but I'm with you like this. I'm going to talk about strategies to effect positive lifestyle behavior change. We physical therapists are mostly working for changing something in our patients' and clients' lifestyle or activities or participation. We try together with our clients to change different conditions for the better, or keep the condition as good as possible. But we know that change is not easy. Change does not always occur, or if it does, it may not be, it may be temporary only. That is annoying for the client and for us as physical therapists. Change is important, though, we know that. And sometimes it means that the situation would stay stable and won't get worse. But how can we support the change in the best way, according to evidence today? There are some systematic reviews about using behavior change techniques in different physical therapy programs or interventions. For example, you see here that they have been mostly used instruction to perform the behavior, demonstration of the behavior, behavioral practice, credible source, graded tasks, and body changes as behavior change techniques. But you also see that soon that they are not the ones with strongest evidence today. They are not being used in these studies, at least those with the strongest evidence. In this meta-regression review, the authors concluded that self-monitoring showed the strongest effect size through all the studies, included studies, and they included 111 studies in healthy eating and physical activity interventions. If one combined self-monitoring with some other techniques, the effect size was even higher. I will come back to that. So today we have strong evidence for techniques in supporting the change. And I believe that you see that these are not surprises for you. They are most probably techniques that you are using, but I wonder if you are using as systematically as you should use. So take a little time to reflect that if there is something more you could do with your client and your patients. Promoting initiation of change, to make an agreement with the patient and client, encouraging the person to make a behavior resolution is an important part of the behavior change techniques. It does matter to say it out loud, to want to change. Goal setting, of course, and using SMART goals as the evidence is today. SMART S is for specific, measurable, actual or activity-related, realistic goal, time-frame goal. And so self-monitoring, to use it before the treatment, to monitor behavior, what do the person do, think and feel in activities and in behavior in activities. During the treatment, for example, about exercise frequency, cognitions and emotions in a behavior in an activity. And after the treatment, for maintenance of the behavior. There are some more techniques that we should give some attention to. Teaching the client or patient to use prompts and cues. That is to identify some reminders for performing behavior. You should teach the clients to identify internal and environmental cues to remind to perform the behavior. The second one is prompt barrier identification. We should try to teach the patients to identify the potential barriers and potential competing goals to the new behavior, and teach them and take together a plan how to overcome these barriers. The next one is set graded tasks. This is this is very common for us. And we are starting with easy tasks and progressing to more difficult tasks, of course. Giving feedback and reinforcing behavior and outcome is the last one here in this slide. And giving feedback not only from physical therapists, but also from the patient themselves and their spouses or other significant people around them. And feedback is about discussion discrepancy with the set goal. The last slide shows us one technique which is about re-evaluation of goals. We should also learn to, because the person is going to deal with the health problems with themselves after our treatment period. And then they need to re-evaluate the goals. We should plan for social support. Importance of support in change process is a very important strategy to change. We should prompt focus on past success. We should teach patients and clients think about the previous success in performing the behavior that increases their self-efficacy in the behavior. And the last one is maintenance, to identify risk situations for relapse and plan to handle the relapse, some kind of problem solving. And we, for not returning to risk behavior, and plan how to avoid or manage. Now pair up and with the person beside you, choose and try one of the presented behavior change techniques with each other. Try one that you have not used very often. Reflect together why you did pick the particular behavior change technique. Reflect how to coach the person to maintain the green level in the health improvement card. And my last is the summary of all those techniques I have been talking about. So choose one of these, something that you haven't been using very often, and get to work and have some fun. Thank you.
So if you can pair up again, and you have the listing of some of the primary health behavior change interventions and strategies that can be easily put into effect by physical therapists. Have a look at your health improvement card, see what the primary health goals that you may have identified in your partner or in your simulated patient, and see which of these you think would be helpful to you in making a change with that individual. Okay, so let's have another 6 minutes and have a little look at these and see which ones would work best in your context. Are we clear? Good, thank you. And 1 more minute. So if I could have you come back together again. Sounds like fabulous discussion, and we're looking forward to the interactive component when we can hear, we have microphones shortly, where to hear your experiences about these particular interventions that you are either using or others that you're learning about that you think would be useful, and to share that with others in the group. But before we go there, we've got Marilyn and Margot to give their components. And Marilyn will speak to the lifestyle behavior change organizational steps.
Great. Thanks very much, Elizabeth. It's my pleasure to be with all of you this morning. So I'm going to look a little bit about what organizations are doing about the NCDs and the main risk factors. Elizabeth has given you the main categories of NCDs, and the big risk factors that we look at are, again, the use of tobacco, the harmful use of alcohol, unhealthy diet, and from our perspective, certainly insufficient physical activity, and overweight and obesity. I'm going to tell you what you're going to do before you actually do it, so I'll give you a little bit of a heads up what's coming. I'm going to ask you to pair up again at the end of this presentation, preferably with somebody you haven't worked with before, but if it doesn't work out logistically, I'm fine with working with the same person. I'm going to have you each assume that you're presidents of your WCPT member organization, and I want you to each suggest 3 totally feasible and reasonable things that you as a president of your MO could implement to increase your country's awareness of the importance of the roles of physiotherapists in the management of the NCDs and their risk factors. And then I'd like each of you to potentially suggest ways your member organization could support physiotherapy clinicians at the local level to integrate information you heard during these presentations into daily practice, and how you might encourage standardizing this type of practice across your MO. So the first thing I'd like to look at quickly are the WHO regions and in terms of what they have as operational policy strategies and action plans for the NCDs, because certainly WHO was in this arena very early on. This description that you see up here in terms of the graph gives you an indication of those countries that actually have plans in place for the NCDs. And the countries are, again, by the regions in terms of those established by WHO. And as you see from the slides up there, certainly the European region and the Western Pacific region have done some really excellent work. The others are beginning to catch up, but those two certainly seem to be in the lead. What's also interesting to look at is what's happened with the WHO policies and plans over the last 5-year period of time. And the trends in availability of operational policies, strategies, and action plans addressing the 4 major NCDs have increased really exponentially from 2010 to 2015. So if you look at the slide again, you'll see the changes in the percentage that each of the countries have reported in terms of their operational plans. So they've had increase of plans from 39% to almost 70% for cardiovascular disease, 46% to almost 73% for diabetes, 19% to 58% for chronic respiratory disease. That was sort of a little lagging area for WHO for a long time, and from 50% to 71% for those forms of cancer that have been looked at as the non-communicable disease-related forms of cancer. In addition, we look at the operational plans and strategies for the main risk factors for NCDs. So we just looked at, again, the 4 NCDs, and now we look at whether they have plans for the risk factors as well. And certainly you see very similar types of data that you saw on the previous slide. So once again, we see very, very good effective work now here in the Southeast Asia region, and followed again by Europe and the Western Pacific area. Again, the trends and the policies that have changed over the last 5-year period of time that WHO collected these data show that the percentage of countries that have reported operational plans have increased almost in the same way for the risk factors as they did increase for the NCDs. So you see again a 36 to 66% increase for reducing the harmful use of alcohol, 44 to 71% for reducing, and this is really pleasing to me, physical inactivity, 53% to 81% for decreasing tobacco use, and 44% to 73% for reducing unhealthy diet. Now we know there are obviously 4 other main risk factors for the NCDs, but these are the 4 that WHO has been tracking over the last 5-year period to see if there have actually been operational plans put in place. Now what are some of the actions that WHO has taken in this arena? Well, they have put forth global recommendations. And if you haven't gone on to the WHO site, I would strongly recommend it, and then just search for NCDs, and you'll come up with really a wealth of information as it relates to the non-communicable diseases. They've also had strategy developments in the areas of reducing risk factors, in increasing the awareness and understanding of the NCDs, in developing, strengthening, and implementing policies and plans for those NCDs, and monitoring science and promoting research in those areas as well. And then they've had the public awareness campaigns. I mean, the brochures that you see up there are typically the global recommendations that have been given for the NCDs. And here are some of the other areas that they have been involved in. Certainly, halt the rise and beat diabetes is extremely important. If any of you have looked at the data related to diabetes, not only in your own countries, but certainly around the world, we have a huge, huge increase in the incidence of diabetes. So WHO developed this great poster, again, using some of those action tools and action persons to try and get a very strong message across. They did the same thing with tobacco. I think that there's no doubt that tobacco, in spite of all the data and the knowledge of the harmful effects of tobacco going way back to the 60s, we still have major tobacco problems throughout the world. So here's one of the other promotional campaigns that WHO did in order to try and say no to that tobacco. Now, what are some of the factors for our MOs to consider? Well, there's no doubt that physical inactivity is pan-epidemic. It's a leading cause of death in almost all of our member organizations, which is really quite scary. I said to my class yesterday when I was teaching, physical inactivity is now called the new smoking. Very sad commentary, but that's the way it is. What smoking was to health back 30, 40 years ago, inactivity is now the new smoking. And it's got to be tackled in the same way. Unfortunately, the tackling by WHO and other organizational structures of physical inactivity was not as vigorous and not as apparent initially as they finally have begun to do now. So we know that the insufficiently active individual has a 20 to 30% increased risk of death compared to individuals who are sufficiently active. And we also know now that sufficient activity can be simply walking and measuring those steps and getting up out of that chair. We know that those who sit all day long, again, have a higher incidence. Even though they may do some higher intensity physical activity, if they're sitting almost 80% of their life, they're not necessarily freed of, again, the processes that may occur related to the non-communicable diseases. So we also must look at areas upon which physiotherapists may have the greatest impact, and also with which society is going to recognize our capabilities. And I think that's been part of our problem for a long period of time. We haven't been looked as the exercise experts and the activity experts, and we need to do that, and we must be there. So it's certainly the area of physical activity and science exercise prescription where I think we have a huge role to play, and we certainly should have the background knowledge to do so. We know that these are key interventions for prevention and treatment of all of the NCDs and most all of their risk factors, and the supporting data for physical activity and exercise is so, so strong. As I mentioned the other day, You know, we have thousands of articles supporting exercise and physical activity. So the science is there, and we just have to embrace that science and use it in our regular practice. Now, what are some of the steps that WCPT has taken? Well, you obviously heard about our involvement in the Health Promotion Improvement Card, and that was a really wonderful collaborative experience for us. In 2011, our World PT Day focused on the physiotherapist roles in the NCDs. We had press releases that started in 2011, the first being physiotherapists as key players in global disease. We did participate in the UN summit meeting addressing the ways of both preventing and also controlling the non-communicable diseases worldwide. We have had a 2014 editorial in physiotherapy that was titled, "Physiotherapists Have a Vital Part to Play in Combating the Burden of Non-Communicable Diseases." And then we have our policy statement on non-communicable diseases. So for our MOs, we have also had steps that we have suggested that our MOs take in order to be able to combat these incredible NCDs across all aspects of the globe. So we encourage and support our MOs to advocate for many things. Obviously, physical activity and exercise is first and foremost, but also resources for the roles of PTs and NCDs and their risk factors. We've also pushed for advocacy in all of our MOs of developing policies and programs and services. And you don't necessarily have to start from scratch. As I said, if you go onto WHO's website or you look at some of the things that WCPT has in place, you know, use those, beg, borrow, steal, do whatever is necessary. Don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to, but optimize your effectiveness at the national level. We also look for advocating of our roles in program development and our involvement certainly in research related to the NCDs, as well as advocating for public policies leading to very healthy lifestyle choices, which certainly we should be making, but also we wish to have all of our patients and clients do as well. In addition to the role for advocating, we also look at the role of physiotherapists for promoting, and that's particularly in the development of national NCD plans. I mean, if I had my druthers, I'd have a physiotherapist on every legislative board or committee that's available that's looking at health promotion or wellness or physical activity, with us providing the guidance as to what should be done and how it should be done. In addition, we look at our roles for supporting activities, particularly as they relate to the global initiatives that WHO has put forth, and also the interprofessional collaborative practices. Combating NCDs is not a single profession's role. We all have major roles to play, and we all have a myriad of skills. You know, I'll go back to the Health Improvement Card because this was such a wonderful example of collaboration. We had the 5 health professions. We had medicine and nursing and dentistry and pharmacy and physiotherapy all involved in the development of the card, and each lent their own little piece. And there was some addendum to the card that was put in by dentistry, for example, who looks at healthy mouths and teeth as being part of health promotion as well. So each of us had our aspect that was key to the development of the Health Improvement Card, but it was a totally collaborative process. And then we also look at our steps necessary to take in educating our health professional communities about the important role that we should have in helping to combat the non-communicable disease epidemic around the world. So, with my presentation done, it's now your turn. I'll go back to my first slide. I'm going to pair up with somebody. If you can find another pair person, that's fine. If not, I'll let you choose whomever you would like. Assume you're both presidents of your member organization, and I want 3 totally feasible, reasonable things that you as president can do to increase your country's awareness of the important roles, and then suggest ways your member organization could integrate that information so that clinical practice potentially could be standardized in this area.
Okay, 1 more minute. So if I could have your attention, and I would like to invite Margot Skinner to come forward to speak to the implications of lifestyle behavior change, a core component of physical therapy education.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Many of you will be educators or clinical supervisors of students, or maybe have indirect contact with students through your associations. So although we're talking about entry-level education, I think it is applicable to everybody. Okay, physiotherapists are the movers and shakers in the professional world, so let's stand up and move around a little bit. Been sitting for an hour. 5 deep breaths, 5 arm abductions, 5 sister stands. If we don't know how to move ourselves, how do we know how to motivate our patients? We need to live the life that we want our patients to lead. So we need to think about the ways that are appropriate and important for people to be engaged in understanding about how to go about changing their lifestyle and changing their behavior to ensure that they have health and well-being. If you want to stay standing, that's fine. If you want to sit down, then maybe I'll let you. But the learning for this aspect of physiotherapy actually begins in the classroom and, of course, is underpinned by the evidence. In our entry-level curricula, we should be thinking about the content that is relevant to non-communicable diseases, and it must have an equal share or even a majority share in our curriculum. When you see the imbalance that we have in the curriculum and the mortality, of global mortality and causes of that, the highest global mortality, as you've seen on previous slides, is from NCDs, and yet in just about every curriculum in a school of physiotherapy around the world, there's an imbalance of the content that's relevant to NCDs. We know that the evidence confirms that the more times that a person is asked by a health professional about their smoking habit, the more likely they are to quit. Yet when we did a survey recently of clinical supervisors, they did not consistently prioritize this when working with the students. Oh, we've asked it, it's been asked before. No, it's not a priority, I'm focused on the ankle. No time to address it. How do we fit with the evidence if we're not prioritizing our questions? And we know that success with lifestyle behavior change actually starts with empowering our patients. And yet many of us are not integrating into professional education in preparing our students for being collaborative practitioners when they graduate. So when we think about the curriculum in the schools, we need to think about the objectives that relate to healthy lifestyles and well-being. Students will need to develop an understanding of international trends for the principles underlying assessment and management of patients with cardiopulmonary and other non-communicable diseases. We need an objective that says that students will develop an understanding of the role of the physiotherapist, the primary role of the physiotherapist in prevention and management of NCDs and related conditions. We need an objective that states that students will be exposed to relevant research that underpins the evidence for the practice and provides additional information to support the development of other objectives relating to health and well-being in our curriculums. We need an objective that says that students will be able to explain the principles underlying assessment and treatment of patients with NCDs. And there are many more, but these should be core objectives in our curriculums. How do we do this? Well, firstly, we can do it through an integrated curriculum that enables the students to assess their own risk for NCDs. Just as we got you to stand up a minute ago, if we don't live the life of movement and activity and well-being, how can we mentor our students to actually live that sort of life and promote it with their patients? So they need to know their own risk levels for NCDs. They need to know how to undertake pre-exercise screening, measure anthropometrics, do submax testing for health and cardiovascular capacity, compare the outcomes for themselves and for their patients with the literature, and obviously to set goals that are appropriate and prescribe exercise that is appropriate for the individual, not for the masses. We need to do it through staff and students practicing or role modelling lifestyle behaviour change interventions and strategies. We need to shift our own mindset about the health system from a sickness to a wellness model. We need to develop a patient-centred, culturally appropriate approach to wellness. And in the country that I come from in New Zealand, we have whānau ora, which is an innovative approach that supports the whānau or the family to identify and achieve their own aspirations with the support of the health professionals. So it's not just one person. We need to engage the family and their support systems so that they have an understanding and an education to be able to support the individual and maybe also interact themselves in a more healthy lifestyle. And we also need to ensure that our teaching institutes, our clinics, our hospitals, our community practices are living the well-being model. How many of you have got reminder notices by the lifts that says, why don't you use the stairs? How many of you open your rehabilitation centres to exercise classes at lunchtime for the staff? And we could go on and on about other opportunities that we have for living the life and modelling the lifestyle. Thirdly, we can improve and consider these things by introducing students to and immersing them in interprofessional education so that patients that have got non-communicable diseases actually benefit from better health outcomes. If you look at the research that WHO has published, there's a very clear indication that the more that the health professionals are learning and working together and working collaboratively, the better the health outcomes for people with NCDs. So we need to start early in our curriculum with exposing students to interprofessional education, engaging them and immersing them in interprofessional education so that they can become collaborative practitioners. Fourthly, we need to teach the students how to recognise and intervene in the cyclic pattern of symptom behaviour that occurs in many of the patients with NCDs. That anticipation of fear of shortness of breath, for example, through somebody who has a chronic obstructive airways disease. So often we can, if we don't recognise the symptoms or the tension developing in the patient, the student doesn't recognise that there are ways to unwind the patient and prevent that cycle from occurring. So we need to teach the students how to recognise these and how to intervene so the patients become more empowered to recognise the symptoms themselves and to reduce the risks associated with potential dyspnea, for example. And fifthly, we need to teach the students the importance of consistently asking patients core health questions about their health and providing a patient-centred approach to the management. We don't treat ankles, we don't treat stroke, we don't treat necks, we don't treat backs, we treat a person who has a condition. And if we think about treating the person, then we think about asking the questions that relate to health and well-being as part of our assessment in that first treatment session that we have with the patient. And I suggest to you that the key questions that we should all include in our practice, no matter what the age of the patient, because remember we've got our whānau or family that we need to include as well. What is your level of physical activity? Do you smoke? How is your sleep health? We spend 24 hours of our day, a third of which is supposedly in sleep, but I don't know that it will be at this Congress, and yet we invariably never ask about that third of the 24-hour cycle. So I suggest that all patients need to be asked the 3 health questions if physiotherapists are going to focus on well-being and hit the road to health as we do with the Health and Wellbeing app. Obviously then we need to follow up with other questions. We need to check to see if the patient is meeting physical activity guidelines when they tell us their level of physical activity. If they say they're a smoker, then we need to follow through with the other questions that give the patient brief advice and opportunity for knowledge about where they can seek cessation support. If the patient says they have a very broken sleep, or they don't sleep well, or they wake with a headache, we need to think about what that's telling us, think about the signs and symptoms that might be related to that, and think about problems like obstructive sleep apnea, which affects 4% of our male population around the world, and is getting to be higher and higher in terms of its prevalence because of the non-communicable diseases, diabetes, obesity, etc., that can actually increase the risks associated with OSA. So what we want you to do now is to spend some time with the people around you, asking yourselves the questions about these 3 things. Do you, in your practice, actually ask these 3 questions? And if you're an educator, do you expect that your students will ask these 3 core questions in regard to health and well-being? So take a moment now to talk with the people around you, admit whether or not you ask those core questions as part of your initial assessment, and if not, why not? Is it because you don't have enough time? Is it because the person's been asked before? And if those are your answers, then I suggest you're not using the literature that supports the evidence to ask these questions of your patients. So think about the questions, ask the people around you, admit whether you do or you don't, and also consider it in terms of your students if you happen to be an educator.
Okay, so what I'd like you to do now, you've had a little bit of a chit-chat, let's have a show of hands. In terms of general level of physical activity, how many of you ask that general question? So yes, so we have a very good. So we've got some honest people there. Sometimes don't always get to that question. Well done. Do you smoke? Yes, quite a few. And then, and if you don't smoke, have you ever smoked, of course, is the good follow-up question. And what about your sleep health? Do we ask about sleep? Excellent. That's something we know is very closely related to the non-communicable diseases. So let's, there should be a final slide there. Can we just bring that final slide up? Okay, while we're waiting to see if that slide, all right. basically what, it's a summary slide because I want that to lead into our discussion. And first of all, what we have done today is to look at the health improvement card, to introduce you to it, to refamiliarize yourself with it, and to think about those behavioral strategies. So let us first think about, would somebody come up? We've got a couple of microphones there. Oh, yes, those objectives. It should be at the very end. How did it feel? Is that something you think is feasible in your context, to use and introduce that health improvement card? Do you see that as being something that we can implement within your context? Anybody like to offer up, or and including those behavioral strategies, which we have to learn? Yeah, it should be at the very end, the very last slide.
The system, when you get to the end, it comes out.
Oh, does it come out? Okay, so there should have been one. Okay, so can we have a show of hands? Does that seem something that could be integrated into your practices, the health improvement card? Yes? Yes? Okay. Does it seem simple enough and something that you could extract the we've lost our last slide. It's a summary slide. Okay. What about those behavioral strategies? Were some familiar and some new ones? Because we appreciate that these aren't commonly taught in physical therapy programs, like goal setting, of course, I think is one that you would, that is probably a very common one, but there are some others there. Those were some of the ones that we distilled down, like the need for providing and ensuring that there's social support for a person in their behavioral change and so on. So there are a number of strategies that can be fairly easily integrated, and as the treatment progresses, these are things that can be discussed while a treatment is ongoing as well as part of an interview. What about those difficult or challenging questions? You know, we're all part of these member organizations, these MOs, as Marilyn had mentioned. What do you see that we can become more active and more participatory and support our professional associations? How many of you have you been involved with any of these discussions at all? I know you're not all necessarily politically active or active within the professional organization, but have any of you had that general role or looking at bigger pictures? I see a few hands there. And would that have been at sort of a regional level or a national level?
Elizabeth, there's a question right here.
Oh, yes, yes, thank you.
Sorry, I'm going to take you back a little bit then. Something you were asking about, these kinds of questions, could we ask them? And my partner and I, we were talking about two things that try to get people to answer honestly. Because I played the part of the patient, and I played the part of a somewhat obese, middle-aged woman who wasn't active. And I don't know, if I came in and I was coming in for a frozen shoulder, I would feel rather judged if someone started to ask those questions, or I could feel. So, and we talked about a little preamble. Will I ask all my patients these types of questions? And how we can introduce the topic for someone who's coming in with a completely, to them anyway,
yes,
unrelated, and how we can help them feel non-judged and comfortable discussing something that most people know if they're overweight and they're not eating. And women, we can be very embarrassed about our middle-aged women bodies. So how we can do that in a way that's non-judgmental and promotes truth so that we can move forward. And I don't know if just asking questions without some preamble is the way, because we can't assume everyone's going to ask honestly.
Yeah, very valid questions. And while I'm having the group thinking about this, the American Physical Therapy Association has provided long-standing, these are 20-year-old, over 20-year-old guidelines now for smoking cessation. And in some of the research we've done, this is a huge thing, is to even ask about smoking and behavior change. And in terms of the direction that they give us, so that it's not patronizing, it's not judgmental, it goes something like this, that, you know, as your health professional, it is really my responsibility to, to support you in any of health goals you may have, and whether this is related to activity or nutrition. And you don't always have to emphasize weight. You know, that's the other thing we've come to appreciate, is that we can separate healthy nutrition from weight, because you can have somebody who's of a healthy weight and not well nourished. So I think that might be one strategy, but I think the notion that, you know, we're here to support whatever we could do to enable that, whatever might work for you, would, you know, if you are ready, of course, the readiness to change is very, very important. Do Marilyn and Margot, do you have any suggestions?
Is this mic on? I'd just like to show something that I do in my practice routinely. I have a patient history form that I send to all of my patients or clients before they ever come in to see me. And as part of that form is asking for their weight and their height. Just so they do it at home before they ever get to see me. So it's a non-discriminatory kind of thing, and I'm not being judgmental because I'm not physically seeing them when they fill this out. The other thing that I look for is if they come in, for example, with a knee-related problem, and I'm looking at obesity, I'm going to look at the data that I want to give them to show them that every time they take a step, 1.1 times their body weight is being borne on that knee, or when they climb a stair, 3.3 times their body weight is being borne on that knee. So for them to understand the incredible stress that their weight is placing without being judgmental and without saying, I want you to consider this. I just do this as routine facts. This is the way it is. And I do that kind of approach with multiple facets of treatment intervention.
Yeah, and I would reiterate that. I think the point we were making is that these questions need to be included in the initial assessment, but the way you ask the question will be entirely appropriate to the situation and the condition. And of course, we all are meant to be good educators, and many people don't recognize that the weight problem might be affecting the knee pain. So we can't make assumptions necessarily, and so I think it's obvious that we would ask the questions in the most appropriate way for the situation, but include them.
The other thing we might think about is doing that quick system screen before we get into our examination. And as part of that is a cardiovascular screen to do a quick check of heart rate, blood pressure, and respiratory rate. You know what, if you find out they're hypertensive, it's another great opportunity to say, listen, your blood pressure looks like it might be elevated, you might go get this checked. And we certainly know that physical activity can be very important in helping to reduce blood pressure without blaming it necessarily on the weight right up front.
Yes, I have a comment on the latter speaker. I think as physiotherapists, we see our patients over a period of time, and it needs trust. You know, I'm just thinking in terms of cultural context, whereby in some cultures, obviously, it can be very demeaning. But I think with time, when the patient has now trusted you, they would probably open up a bit more. And I think the other thing is the environment where you are assessing your patient in must also have pictures or whatever supporting exercise, you know, because that will show that physiotherapists are really involved. And then by the time you ask the patient, they may not really feel offended. That was just for the other one. But I remember the first time you started, you asked if the health improvement card was appropriate or something. I would like to suggest that probably if we say different areas or regions adapted, because I think it will be very appropriate if it's adapted to the context that we're in. In America, the situation is different. In Africa, it's different. And in Asia, just on and so forth. So I think it's a good tool. Obviously, it needs a bit more improvement. But the best will actually be to adapt it according to the area that you're in. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank
I think
you very
that was
much.
the
Very
intent of the
important
card
comments.
originally.
Yes.
It was the intent of the card originally, that it was a prototype that you could take and then make appropriate to your particular clinic, practice, country, or whatever.
And of course, cultural appropriateness is really relevant in every situation. So as physiotherapists, you know how and when to ask the questions, but they are core to health and well-being.
I just wanted to make one point about the trust issue. Very, very important. In fact, as we as physical therapists are uniquely positioned because we are of the primary health professions, the one that spends the most time with patients over time. And the literature is very clear that that trust building comes with that time. So thank you for highlighting that point. Is there another?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. There are a few issues and concerns that maybe some of us from South Africa will want to raise, and it has to do with the scope of practice. When you talk about exercise prescription, and I looked through about 19 legislations concerning scope of practice, and the protection of prescription of exercises is very weak. And now in this country, we've got a group of professionals that are also prescribing exercises. How do you therefore, maybe we'll have to learn from the American or the Canadian experience, how do you ensure that the patient is protected from professionals who are supposed to prescribe exercises so that patients are not overburdened from different professions prescribing exercises? For instance, we have the biokinetists and we have the physiotherapists. Who should prescribe exercises? Thank you.
Can I just give you a little background? In Singapore, we did a very interesting presentation on exercise as medicine, friend or foe of PT, deciding whether this whole philosophy of medicine prescribing exercise is appropriate. I think what we have to look at, it is so important for all of our citizens to move. And we will not be the only individuals who advocate exercise for individuals. So whether we could ever totally protect and say we are the only persons in any country to prescribe exercise, I don't think it's going to happen. But the collaborative arrangement, to me, makes much more sense. And we finally, in the US, have gotten the American College of Sports Medicine and the exercise as medicine movement to recognize physios as providers within that system. Prior to that, we had not even been recognized as individuals who should be prescribing exercise. So I think we'll take our share of the responsibility to prescribe exercise and know that we have the expertise to do it. Hopefully we can position ourselves so that we're better than most, but there's a ton to go around, and if all of us can work together to get our citizenry moving, I think that's going to be the best globally for all of us in the long run.
Okay, thank you.
And we do have to bring the session to a close, and thank you for that, because I think encroachment and infringement and scope of practice are really core issues. But I would really love you to email us regarding any thoughts that you may have had today and want to put forward, because we're always interested in spreading the word, and this input will help refine further the toolkit, including the health improvement card and how we administer it. We need your input and involvement and support to make organizational change, educational changes, and practice changes. So please, don't think any comment is not a good comment. We really value those. So please do get in touch with any one of us, and we will integrate those thoughts into future presentations and hopefully into publication of this session today. But in closing, we want to thank you for your participation and insights. This has been inspiring.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I've been standing. I know.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see
I'm way
you.
in the back here, so you didn't see me standing.
Oh, right, yes.
But just want to go back to the point about the question asking about
Yes,
your weight.
yes.
Many times, most times, I don't ask the question because we see it. It comes as part of your initial evaluation. But what I do is I start the person in a program, in a fitness program as well, and as time goes on and they begin to feel the good feeling of exercise, eventually that comes in. And it's no longer a problem. So without questions, I'm able to get to where I want to go.
Point well taken. Absolutely. And I think those kind of strategies we probably need to talk about more, and how to make those judgments, and that's another way, effective way of bringing somebody on board. Sorry to have missed you. It's a little dark out there. But thank you for coming forward. We do look forward, as I say, to writing up the proceedings, and on behalf of the team, I would like to thank each and every one of you for your ongoing support of this work, and for serving as ambassadors once you get home, and moving our unique profession forward regarding what the literature supports as being highly evidence-informed in terms of where we should be by focusing contemporary practice as members of the largest established, largely non-pharmacologic health profession in the world. This is our moment, and we need to make the change and lead in this change. Thank you so much.